Hey everybody, Cameron Dennis from the Blockchain Acceleration Foundation here, also known as BAF. We're a 501c3 nonprofit that acts as a trusted matchmaker in the blockchain space to connect academics, researchers, industry, and other professionals. And we're here with Aaron Soskin, Hudson Jameson, Mattison Asher, and Yalda Mousavinia. And if everyone could just turn your mics and cameras on, we can get started. Yeah, I'm going to get going. Aaron, you can take it away.
Awesome. Well, welcome to the show. It's good to see you. It's good to have everyone here. Very exciting. Thank you all in the crowd for coming. We have a great lineup of speakers today. And thank you, Cameron, for teeing this up. For those who this is your first event of the series, my name is Aaron Soskin, and I run the San Francisco Decentralized Governance Meetup group, as well as the founder of a company called Govern. And for the last 4 months, BAF and the SF DeGov Meetup group have been doing a series of protocols and DAOs, bringing together leading protocols and leading DAOs to kind of figure out like what we can learn from each other in the space. That's why we're all here. So we've had 3 great sessions. We have an amazing session today. I'm super, super excited. Some like of the biggest names in figuring out how Ethereum as a protocol should be governed. A lot of different ideas, a lot of really good institutional knowledge here. It's going to be dope. And yeah, the way the session is going to work for everyone, we got about an hour. We're going to go over a list of topics we have for about that hour. And at the end, we're going to do about 10 minutes of Q&A. And so as things are going, feel free to drop questions in the Q&A section or the chat section. We'll pick those up as we go. And with that, let's get started. I'm going to allow each one of our guests to kind of go through. Maybe if you guys can all give your name, why you got into the space, and kind of what you do in the space. And then also a fun fact about you. So my name is Aaron Soskin. I'm the founder of Govern. I got in the space because of the opportunities to like change our political systems. And fun fact about me is I think ranch is the best condiment ever created. I could put ranch on everything. So yeah, Asher, you want to start, or Mattison, pardon me?
Yep, so my name is Mattison. I'm the founder and MC of the Ether, which is a debate platform for the Ethereum ecosystem. Originally from Nashville, Tennessee. I see someone else is from Nashville, so I want to call attention to that fact. Originally got into crypto. I come from a major in political science. I've always been a sort of human organization wonk. And so I really was attracted to a network that could incentivize people to organize and contribute work outside of traditional corporate structure. So that's originally why I became, very interested in Ethereum. And since then I've been working on crypto projects for years. Interesting fact, I used to be a competitive slalom water skier, which is one ski water skiing, because I was not coordinated or athletic enough to do any other sport.
It feels like a lot of coordination required. So Yalda, you want to go next?
Yeah, hi. Let's see, how did I get into this space? By working on a project called Space Decentral, where we needed DAO tools to operate. And Space Decentral is a project that's evolving now as far as like the scope of it, but it's meant to connect people to work on larger scale challenges for our Earth and for our understanding of the universe as with more like cooperative like governance, using blockchain to enhance things. But I did get interested in Ethereum, before needing to actually use it from a sense of the application sense, just from, crypto 2016, hearing about the DAO project in general.
Then now you're involved with Moloch DAO, right?
Yes, yes. And sorry, it's like 2 a.m. where I'm at right now. So
Thank you.
my alertness. But yes, so right now I'm involved in Moloch DAO. I don't even know how to say what I am. We don't really have like roles and names, but I help with Moloch DAO, and Hudson's also a part of Moloch DAO.
And then what's a quick fun fact?
Fun fact. I don't know. A fun fact. I like strategy board games. When I was in college, I used to play like Risk or Risk 2210 AD, or like just like weird, like not weird, but yeah, just strategy board games.
Risk 22 AD was actually the first Risk I ever saw, and then I only later realized that there was an OG Risk.
Yes,
so.
Yes.
All right, Hudson, want to take a second to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Hudson Jameson. I am kind of a community and core developer liaison for the Ethereum Foundation. And I've been involved in Ethereum since 2015 or so. Been involved in crypto since 2011, and before being at the foundation, I worked at a bank doing their blockchain program for a few years. Let's see. I work a little bit, or I help a little bit with voting in Moloch DAO. So I guess I'm a Moloch DAO member. And just to throw this out there real quick, Mattison's The Ether project is amazing, and Yalda does a great job organizing stuff with Moloch. She's really pushing things forward. So they're not going to like toot their own horn, but I need to for them. Other than that, I live in Texas. I have 3 cats. I have 1 spouse, and I plan on the fun fact. So the fun fact is I have a podcast with a group of friends that is a tabletop role-playing game actual play podcast using Star Wars Edge of the Empire. So it's called Tabletop Squadron. I'm actually wearing the shirt, and yeah, it's a whole lot of fun. It's basically like D&D but Star Wars for those who aren't familiar with tabletop games.
That is a podcast I think I could get behind pretty quickly, I'll be honest.
Should try it.
Check that out. Well, cool. Well, thank you all for being here. And like, I'm going to just echo what Hudson said. Everyone here, like Hudson included, are all incredible. And like, first off, we should all give all 3 of you guys a huge thanks for pushing the Ethereum ecosystem forward. Like, let's take, actually, it's not even in the questions. Let's take a moment to appreciate how like the big milestone we recently reached with ETH 2.0. Staking is happening. It's starting to happen. The contract's starting to get filled. That's awesome. So first off, I just want to clap it up to the 3 of you guys for helping push that forward. It's a huge milestone. So let's dive into some issues on governance. Like we said, we think about here is different governance styles. And the cool thing about the Ethereum space is our ability to test and explore and experiment with new styles. One of the questions I like to start with is kind of what do you guys see as the difference between DAO governance styles and protocol governance styles? And like where they diverge, where they converge, like are there lessons we can learn from each other? Hudson, if we'll go in reverse order if you want to kick this one off.
Sure thing. So when I think of protocol governance versus DAO governance, I guess, and this is mainly drawing from my experience doing protocol governance work, I do the core developer call for Ethereum every 2 weeks. So like the clients across the ecosystem come together and plan hard forks and stuff. And then also from seeing the stuff in Moloch DAO, I think that there's more urgency and pressure and importance for protocol development, not because DAO or protocol governance, not because DAO governance isn't important, but without the protocol, you can't have DAOs on top of it. So there needs to be more stringent governance, I guess, like more strict governance when it comes to protocols, like what experts are we going to let in? What decisions are we going to have be made? Stuff like that. So when it comes to DAOs, it's a little more open. Like you could have more of a flurry of ideas from all different levels, and you don't have, all you have to do is know how to use MetaMask a lot of the time to make decisions on DAO funding and stuff. And you know, they are selective about who, some DAOs are selective about who the members can be. But I think it's just a whole different layer because the DAOs are on the application layer and the protocols on the protocol layer, I guess.
That's interesting. And to push back real fast, I guess I have a question. It might be interesting, Yalda, to get your opinion on this next. Is like, I get that the DAO is the application there that's on top of the protocol layer. But do you think that just because it's on different layers, like a stacking of layers, like the inherent way we govern it needs to be different? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that it needs to be different because there are, with a DAO, there's less of a need for expertise in a very, very niche area usually. So like, for instance, Moloch DAO, or I think Metacartel operates this way too. They have just a variety of people from all different walks of life and all different expertise, and you just need to know how to use Ethereum. Whereas in protocol development, if you don't know how to like do low-level coding and know the networking protocol and stuff like that, then it makes it more difficult to participate and you won't contribute as much. So that's why there's that like barrier of entry, I guess. And so that makes it different to govern.
That makes sense. Yalda, just get what your take is.
I guess I would say we are still early as far as DAO governance goes, and as far as what good DAO governance looks like, and maybe even the same for protocol governance. I can definitely see a point in the future where a protocol would utilize a DAO to improve their governance. But I think it's just like it's still going to be about like, okay, well, what sort of decisions do we want recorded on chain to use votes or curation or signaling versus like the stuff that just needs to happen through rough consensus. Because I mean, I think that if you just like project protocols 100 years into the future, are the teams really never going to want to use an application to potentially improve their operations? Right now, it's just a question of if a DAO, in how much like efficiency it adds, or if it just adds more complexity in these early stages as we're tinkering around with the tools and discovering new modes of operation.
That makes sense. And what I think is interesting about how Moloch DAO has decided to try to push forward ETH and Mattison, it's actually be super interesting to get your take next on it, is in like Hudson said, when you're talking about protocol level governance, especially with Ethereum, you need a little bit of expertise. What Moloch DAO has decided to do is take an incentive alignment approach to kind of force expertise, right? Like, hey, if we all put our Ethereum in this together and we only fund projects that's going to make Ethereum better, we have an incentive to fund the best projects because then the price of ETH goes up and the money machine goes burn, we all get excited. I guess like, y'all, like, do you ever, like on the flip side, do you think there's a lot of credence to Hudson's point about a lack of expertise? Like, do you think a lack of specific expertise in Moloch DAO makes the decisions worse? Or do you actually think that DAO incentive alignment strategy works pretty well?
Maybe I have like a different opinion on DAOs, but I think that starting to have pods of experts is a good thing. As far as Moloch DAO goes and our operations, I would say we're still in our early phases, and I think that some transformation to improve operations would be good. And I think part of that is actually how we can have like pockets of experts or guilds that are specializing in different fields. So I think that as a DAO's governance matures, it will probably evolve to have similarities to, I guess, protocol governance that we're seeing today. And then I think they will all kind of evolve to the next level to have, some similarities to more existing corporate governance, but still like not just legacy corporate structures, but how we like advance those models to be more in tune with, I guess, what our humanity is, perhaps.
I think that's interesting, and a question that comes up pretty often is like, we are experimenting with a lot of new models, but how much of the models that we're experimenting with are based in what we're already seeing out there today, and what more learnings we kind of approach. Mattison, I want to kick it over to you now. I want to hit on the piece that Yalda talked about in terms of, we're starting to see these DAOs, multiple DAOs with a similar goal of a protocol. It's like almost like, instead of a protocol politician, it's like a protocol party. And it allows for these pods of expertise, like Yalda was talking about. The whole goal is bringing in more people to the conversation. How do you see those like pods of expertise really starting to bubble up to the top?
Yeah, that's a great point, and I appreciate you bringing that up. One of the things I think that's a very unsolved issue within the crypto ecosystem at large is, how do you show expertise? Is expertise how much ETH you hold? Is expertise how many Twitter followers you have? Is expertise the prestige of the organization that you work for? And to me, none of those are terrific indicators or proxies for insider expertise. And with tokens, you can effectively create non-transferable tokenized reputation systems where people earn reputation that represents their expertise within a particular subject by doing things such as debating other users and seeing what people agree with, what people don't agree with, showing their knowledge, and even, it can be the point where contributing to projects, whether it be GitHub commits or etc. So there is so much there's so much opportunity to test out novel reputation systems that aren't actually monetized at all, but are purely living in your wallet as a non-transferable token that can really be experimented with within the Ethereum ecosystem. It's one of the things that we're very focused on at the Ether with our XP system. And I want to also bring up another point. I 100% agree with what Hudson says. DAOs and protocols, it's like, to me, that question is almost like, should your local community, maybe your local church governance, be the same thing as the UN? To me, those are two very, very different structures. And DAOs are a very generalizable term. Usually they're servicing a specific community or a specific niche. And to me, that's much closer to than sort of a specific community. Maybe it's like a nonprofit community, something like the Junior League, for example, or other smaller organizations. And obviously that organization is not going to function the same way as something like the UN.
That does make sense, and I get where you're going with that. But to push back a bit, on the flip side of that, do you think that do you think DAO governance creates more engagement and participation than protocol governance? Like, for example, we have all these DAOs that allow for people to try to incentivize what's happening, influence what's happening with Ethereum. Then we have Ethereum, right? The core devs who are essentially governing the protocol. Like, I agree, there are two different levels of governance. But on the flip side, would you say that DAO governance brings more people into the process?
So I'm a big believer in increasing community agency, Ethereum community agency, throughout the governance process. And what I mean by that, that's not to say everyone who holds Ether gets a vote. I do not believe one Ether, one vote is the right system by any means. I don't think that's the right system for any blockchain because of what I brought up before. I don't think how many Ether you hold is necessarily indicative of your expertise or your insight. But what I do believe is that, DAOs are experimenting right now with different ways to gauge what their members want and what their members don't want. And we could have a lot better sentiment gauging tools than what we currently utilize within the Ethereum governance process, which is effectively eyeballing different forums and really eyeballing Twitter primarily to gauge community sentiment. I think there could be a lot more comprehensive process that's quantitatively a little bit more accurate and built specifically for the purpose of gauging community sentiment, so we can get a much better idea of what does the community want at large, why do they want it, or what do they think. It's not even necessarily, it's really what they think about these various issues. What do miners think about this issue? What do the emerging validators think about this issue? What do different stakeholders think? And then allowing people to really transparently see these are the opinions on this issue. I think that would really help in informing any sort of decision-making process.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And especially when you talk about how to like kind of the different kind of ways to bring in the different pieces of it all. And what you hit on is actually something that someone from the audience is bringing up too in the chat, which is saying that the biggest difference is that DAO governance needs to be a more formalized structure because it's a more formalized tool. You have to build the smart contracts. I guess like Hudson, as the guy that kind of runs the Ethereum core dev governance process right now, do you kind of agree with, do you think, how formalized is your process? Do you think it's more formalized than Moloch DAO? You're in both. And I guess, would you agree with that? Like, does protocols skimp on formalized governance processes by utilizing tokens as an incentive alignment tool?
I would say that for the first part of your question, the core developer like consensus process is better defined as rough consensus. There's actually a chat, like the chat going on, and we've been talking about rough consensus a little bit in there, and it's actually looser than what a DAO generally would consider their consensus thing, because a lot of the time you have to program smart contracts to be able to take an answer from the group, whatever answer they decide, whether it's give money to this group, distribute ether here, take these shares and move them over here. So it has to be kind of a yes, no, up, down thing. It can't be rough like we do in the core dev chat where it's like, oh, who wants this to happen? And there's yes and no's, and we might come with a compromise or something that is in between. So that's how I think it's different. It's more formalized. Well, I don't know if the word's formalized, but it's stricter, I guess, at a DAO level and less strict at a protocol level, although the ultimate actions of those decisions are very much the same, where like there's a hard yes or no decision on if like a hard fork's happening. And then you were saying something about tokens, how that distribution, what were you saying?
I was saying that, like, do you think you kind of answered it? Do you think protocols skimp on their on designing a governance process by just like having this fallback answer that like the token incentive alignment will just govern everyone because everyone will have the same incentive for the price to go up?
Yeah, I think that a lot of the times, and there's actually been a ton of Twitter conversations about why don't core devs have ether? Why don't they say how much ether they have? They don't have skin in the game. And skin in the game is really overrated when it comes to protocol development, because there are, at the end of the day, we're all people, and people build stuff for different reasons, but as long as they're altruistic and they're doing it for the right reason and they're building things and not being malicious, I don't really care if you have ether. I don't really care. It might help if you have skin in the game to like to signal something, but otherwise I don't think it matters really.
Aren't we? Isn't that in another word saying that we're using trust in what we're trying to build as a trustless environment?
Right now, yes. Until things progress to where we're thoroughly decentralized enough. I mean, like right now, we're not. I mean, we're decentralized in some ways, but like Geth controls 80% of the network. The core dev meetings have no more than 20 people at a time, across like three or four different clients, maybe 4 or 5. So it's not as decentralized as we could be. So right now, it's better than it used to be. It used to be kind of altruistic, benevolent dictatorship, and with a group of core people, and it's kind of been growing out over time. So it's better than it used to be.
Fair, I guess. Improving is good. Like we always should be striving for that. Yalda, I mean, Ethereum, so the core devs use this kind of rough consensus process, which I think there's a take to say like how opaque is rough consensus? Like, do we need a less opaque version? Like, can you compare that to the strategy you guys use at Moloch DAO? If Moloch DAO is also trying to push Ethereum 2.0 forward, like, how do you guys try to achieve consensus on what type of projects you should be funding?
Well, I mean, I would say it's like the decisions of what protocol developers are governing versus what DAO members are governing are different. It's like software technology decisions versus funding decisions. And it's like, we're imagining this like world of protocol development where we're just assuming that the developers are getting money from who knows what, like we're ignoring that part of the system. All they're doing is like rough consensus on like the technology. And I think that's where things are actually like broken in this equation as far as like protocol governance versus DAO governance, and ignoring actually like the capital of what funds the protocol developers. It's like, okay, it's like a foundation. It's like, is that foundation gonna be there forever? Okay, if it's not, then that means that that will be from a DAO. So then things start to kind of converge a bit, where you'll have the DAO that is helping fund the protocol development. But yeah, we're making software decisions. You don't want voting for software decisions, and that's just like companies and everything. So things like you'll have like the board of directors that's deciding what higher level initiatives, engaging some managers to manage things and make decisions without consulting with the board. So I think that like when we're comparing this like protocol governance versus DAO governance, I think we're really just talking about like two different executive functions, or just like two different functions of like a business and a system. People that are managing money, people that are managing technology. It's completely different.
Do you not? Sorry, go ahead, Mattison. Were you going to add something?
No, I 100% agree, but I do think there are times when those issues overlap. And I think that a great example of that is with ProgPow. I would say, yes, that's a technical decision that was being evaluated, but the arguments that people really made for why ProgPow should be implemented or why shouldn't be implemented were largely done on ideological lines. And so that's where a prime example where I think the political or the ideological really does cross-section with the technical.
The question I was going to pose back was like, do they influence each other? We both have a stake in it, right? Like, it might not be technical, but we have a stake in the technical decisions. The technical people might not like, and on the flip side, I would say is even more important. Technical people might not have the final say over the monetary, what's getting funded, but they actually should have. They absolutely should have a say, right? They know what we should be funding, and we have some opinion on what should be getting built. So while I do agree that there are two different governance styles, I guess there's this big idea that we've been talking about, like DeFi Legos is this new meme. I actually believe it should be governance is like DGov is Legos. Like governance styles is composable. Like I guess to that degree, like if we think of these two things, protocol level governance and DAO level governance over Ethereum as two different departments in a company, what crossover should they have? Like what accountability should those departments have to each other? It's a question to anyone who wants to answer it.
I mean, I guess that's like part of the problem right now with how some of the priorities are made, or some of the maybe the conflicting things are ultimately, yeah, the more money an institution or an entity can allocate or budget to dev resources, the higher likelihood you might see that in some kind of like protocol upgrade, like if it gets like enough testing or enough like resources, enough people looking at it. So it's like there's always going to be that kind of more oh, sorry, I think I'm off track with like the question, but I think it's hard to fully say like how you can like perfectly design this system, because it is like messy, but there are like different forces at play here, and the capital one is definitely like a very interesting one as far as how priorities work. How are core developers being prioritized? How are they choosing like what to prioritize versus what other people like like hardware manufacturers, other people like that think.
I think that money does have something to do with it. I think that if you push money behind an EIP, you have a better chance of getting that EIP in. And we've seen that with EIP 1559, which is the fee market. That actually has a combination of a few high-profile members of the community like Vitalik and Eric Connor and others coming behind that EIP and really pushing the agenda on like crypto Twitter and Reddit about it. So that's one way that it kind of got pushed along. Another way was the fact that there's been crowdfunding and funding from places like the Ethereum Foundation to start having like economic or crypto economic studies done on it, and then of course building out the implementation and the testing and everything else. So that's a really good example of where money was put behind it, and it actually succeeded. I guess on the flip side though, ProgPow had a lot of money put behind it in the form of some audits, and ProgPow ended up not going forward. So even though capital is not at all a main way these things happen, and we can see that via ProgPow, how it can get shot down so quickly.
Round this out, or?
Yeah, so can you summarize the core question?
Yeah, like if we accept that there are different departments that govern Ethereum as a protocol, one is a DAO called Moloch DAO, and one is the core devs. How much influence should they have over each other? And should we have formalized accountability measures, I guess?
So I definitely think there needs to be more, whether it be one doing it to the other, I don't necessarily know if that's the solution. I do think there needs to be some more accountability measures within the ecosystem at large. I think actually one of the greatest issues we have right now, and this goes back to that reputation point, is there's not actually a lot of accountability within this ecosystem. There are people who come in and do scammy things or exploit the community. Maybe they go away for 6 months, 3 months, or whatever, and then they come back. And especially if they have a lot of money, a lot of those sins have been washed away. There's not a really good reputation system that exists for the Ethereum ecosystem, or a system that's been developed that appropriately works with the key players to reward that reputation. And I think that's probably one of the most dire needs and the least talked about that the Ethereum ecosystem could use to really grow and become so much more than what it currently is.
Yeah, I actually really agree with that point. It's actually one of the things, it's like what Govern is trying to work on, is use accountability as a measure to increase decentralized governance, right? You can just use decentralized power doing two things. You either give more voting rights to more people, or you give more accountability measures over those that do have voting rights. What we're working on Govern is that second one. How do you create more accountability mechanisms? So yeah, I think that is a really interesting and good point. Two, which brings me to my next point, which is, I know I've heard a critique that we, especially as we all live on crypto Twitter, is if there is enough input from the community when we make these Ethereum protocol decisions. I think it would be interesting to get kind of all three of your guys' takes on that, like as a core dev, as a Moloch DAO, and as the Ether, which is like trying to do that. Like, do we have enough like input from the community? And two, is that something that is the most important thing that we should be working on right now? I don't know, we're gonna start, Mattison, start with you.
Yeah, so my opinion is definitely no, we don't have enough. Not only do we not have enough input, and I think it's bi-directional, this issue. It's both, it's partially on the community's fault for not, figuring it out how to organize effectively in order to voice their opinions in a structured way to the core developers who are really making these decisions. And it's also a problem for everyone that there hasn't been any mediums where people are really hosting these conversations. So they're constantly updated about the crucial issues that they're facing. It's gotten a lot better, don't get me wrong, over the past, especially 6 to 12 months. But if you look at it, if I were going around today and asked the average, influencer within Ethereum or the average ETH holder, what's currently the issues that core developers are really examining and the issues that they're debating internally, I guarantee less than probably even 1% of them would be able to answer me. And I think that's a huge problem. I think that's a huge educational problem. So I think, I'm sorry, I want to make sure I answered the original question. So what was the original question precisely?
Community have more involvement in the Ethereum protocol decision-making process.
Yeah. So
and should that be the most important thing we work on right now to increase it?
So is that the most important thing right now? I think that will be the most important thing if Ethereum is going to last beyond our lifetimes. And I really mean that. And for Ethereum to exist especially beyond the core group that built it and is heralding it as effectively to the world and doing that incredibly effectively, for it to last beyond ourselves, we have to build some sort of system that ensures that it's self-sustaining that way. Some sort of reputation system, some sort of sentiment gauging system, so at least sentiment can be taken into account for. Not saying that anyone has to act on that sentiment, but at least they have that data point when making decisions to understand what the stakeholders of the Ethereum community think about these issues. I think that's a necessity if we really want to have a network that lasts for hundreds of years.
I think community involvement is absolutely critical. However, over the years, my opinion has changed. I've really, early on in the core developer meetings, I tried to get community consensus on issues and bring them to the core devs. But the reality is a few things. One of them is a lot of I'd say 80 to 90% of the issues that the core developers deal with, maybe it might be less now, but at least back in the day, a lot of the core developer decisions were stuff that the community either didn't have the expertise in order to comment on, or just wouldn't care about anyway. Just like, who would care if the dev P2P networking protocol adopted snappy compression? Like, we don't know it. I don't know what that is, let alone, and I'm actually at the meetings and I still don't know what that is, but it was debated among like 5 people and got put in the protocol. So we don't need community around for that. And I think that's why we don't have a lot of participation, is because the majority of discussions and decisions are about really boring, very, very deep technical topics. Now, we do need a platform and a way to have the community engage in things that involve stuff that would break smart contract standards or improve smart contract standards or adjust gas prices, or things that people can understand if you're on the DApp layer. And I think people run into problems and they try to make EIPs for it to circumvent those problems when it comes to the DApp layer. And I think DAOs like Moloch DAO are really good for gauging what the community needs, because they're going out and they're trying to either fund or push forward different run into problems that go down all the way to the protocol layer, and that's where feedback gets developed. So for instance, Tornado Cash was developed and funded under Moloch partially, and the feedback that we received from Tornado Cash helped us shape some core developer decisions. I don't know exactly which ones. I off the top of my head, I can't think of it, but there's been some gas price reshuffling and stuff like that that definitely has come from DApp layer, DAO, and other community projects that have spoken up.
Yeah, and I think it's tough, right? Like, listen, I'm sure I'm not the one that needs to tell you how tough your job is, but like, it's tough, and I get it. And like, what I kind of like to compare it to is, if you compare it to like real world politics, for instance, a lot of people don't know the intricacies of like nuclear war, you can say, right? But a lot of people have an opinion on what the general direction should be. And we have this trust-based political system where we trust someone to be like, hey, take it in this direction. I don't know how to make it happen, but I need you to take it to this direction. Like, by voting, right? I guess my question back to you, Hudson, and then to you, Yalda, is like I agree. The low-level decisions, there's no way people would ever be able to understand. Should we do more of trying to get the directional sentiment from community members, or is it still too early on for that?
We're hitting that really unique point where we're starting to need that from different levels. So yeah, we're not totally there yet. We're in a weird transition period. It feels really awkward right now, especially in the core dev meetings, and especially when people, hear about stuff coming out of CoinDesk and things from core dev meetings, and it's not completely clear. And then they're like, well, this isn't what I wanted to happen. I thought I trusted you guys. But I kind of think back to like a liquid democracy model where you can like delegate your positions and ideas to people that you trust. I think that'd be a really cool idea, but it would definitely start to cement the technocracy that we have today within the core developer community, where they are really making all the decisions. And even though there's community input, it's really purely delegated. Whereas right now the community can still come up and say, hey, I really don't want this to happen, just like in ProgPow.
That makes sense. That's a really good point. And Yalda, kind of kicking it to you, and I want to actually do two parts of this question, picking up on the last piece Hudson talked about liquid democracy. One, do you think the core devs are getting enough feedback from the community in their protocol level decisions? And two, do you think it would, like, this was actually proposed by Ross from LuxDAO, of like, do you think that there should be a DAO that runs Ethereum protocol level decisions?
Are they not getting enough feedback? I mean, I guess I don't fully know, but I would say I'm not being like proactively reached out to see like what my thoughts are, like on how, like what are your needs as a customer of Ethereum? You know, like there's not, like I don't know. It seems like maybe sometimes I get confused, like what is the operating drive of like the core devs? Is it we want more adoption, we want more users? I guess because if that was the case, then I would say, yeah, they should talk more to the application developers, because those are your users, the direct users of the protocol, and the application developers have the direct users of the apps. So it's like if you're not having this more direct relationship with the application developers as a protocol developers, it's just all kind of like we're just operating in silos and not like moving the ship in the right direction if our goal is more like greater adoption of Ethereum. So I think that's basically like what needs to be determined from a product management perspective. And I guess my background is product management from like a career standpoint goes. Like I guess I've done 12 years of product management now since like 2008. So whenever I like observe like core development and then just like being a user of this product, but not really sure like product methodologies as far as driving some of the roadmap decisions.
That makes sense. And like to the next point, if we are looking for more community feedback, do things like Moloch DAO give enough community feedback? And the last question of like what Ross proposed, should there actually be a DAO additionally that the core devs use for making decisions?
I think that there should be like a DAO where you can have like one sort of vote per application developer just for like signaling purposes at the very least. Like, let's go find all the application developers, give them one vote, and then let's do some like curation and real like sentiment gathering from dApp developers. I think that that's very important, and I would like try to work on prioritizing that myself, whether it's within Moloch DAO or otherwise. It's just a slow process.
That makes sense. And it really brings up this idea of like kind of what we like, again, not comparing it to politics all the time, but like why there's in a lot of national governments, there's dual houses, right? To represent different core incentives, right? House of Reps versus Senate, and they have different rules and different things they govern, so they can kind of try to balance each other out. That'd kind of be an interesting idea for it. Hey, Vitalik, thanks for joining us up here.
Hello, good to be here. Yeah, no, actually, the dual house stuff I think is interesting. And one example of this is that like the Bitcoin ecosystem kind of had this to some extent, right? Like you would have the US-based mostly core developers, you would have the Chinese miners, and they even ended up taking mostly opposite sides of the Bitcoin block size debate. And I guess, well, that was an interesting case, right? Because you actually tried to have a kind of well, it wasn't deliberate, but you ended up having a multi-constituency thing that's where the constituencies are actually really different. As opposed to where, I mean, like my opinion about all of this kind of House, Senate, like stuff in traditional democracies is that it tends to be pretty useless because they're mostly selected by the same people anyway. But like here, you know, you would have a lot, like miners are actually this very even culturally disjoint group, and so you got this interesting effect from empowering them. But then like the eventual result in that case, I think, basically became that it turned into a civil war and the miners lost, and so they kind of gave up on participating. But again, I guess I wonder, like, in the case of either Ethereum or DAOs, like, could we do better than that?
It's an interesting idea, and it kind of brings me to like what I think is one of the coolest things that we've started to discover. Regardless of whether we need more community engagement or if we need to create like a dual incentive, a dual house or dual incentive strategy, which is like really we came up with this new idea of exit rights, which was never like a really explored idea in like any type of governance. Now we have this idea of exit rights, and that kind of changes the game a little bit. But there is a difference, there is a difference in exit rights between a DAO and between a protocol. Exit rights in a protocol means forking. Exit rights in a DAO means rage quitting, right? If we use the Moloch DAO structure. Way easier to exercise your exit rights and rage quit than it is to exercise your exit rights and fork, because fork, you need to fork the entire like community, and that's almost impossible to do at this point. Because of that, and I guess I'll start the question with Vitalik and then go back around. Because of that, isn't there an argument that governance over the protocol needs to be more transparent because we have the exit rights are less strong, if you will, or weaker?
I think it's definitely a fair point, and it's definitely true that kind of realistic ability to split the chain is significantly lower than it was in 2016. And like at the very least, any algorithmic stablecoin would just completely break on one side or the other, and so the either just financial losses from a split are going to be very large, whereas that wasn't necessarily true back in 2016. So like that definitely does mean that we need to care more about governance, about making sure that we have a good governance, because we have like exit as a backstop less. Now, what form of governance it is, I mean, I guess like one way to try to kind of descriptively put a label on top of fork-driven governance in a case where forks can't happen is that it's kind of like a mutually assured destruction model, right? And I mean, mutually assured destruction models can work like totally fine, right up until the eventual moment where they really chaotically break and cause a lot of damage. So I guess the question, I mean, like the question of where we go from here is definitely an interesting one. Like it could involve just a kind of formalizing more and more norms over time, and it could involve just like the protocol kind of ossifying more and more over time. I don't know.
Yes, and I want to kick this over to kind of respond to that. Like because of the exit rights, because of the discrepancy in exit rights, should protocol governance be a little bit more transparent?
I think that we're still so very early on, and all the norms, exactly as Vitalik said, are still very much being developed and even formalized. And so, you know, one of the things that I like to refer to is I actually like to refer to, you know, they're not bylaws, but what EIPs have actually been published so far and have been approved by the community and been adapted. And even in EIP 1, it specifically says, you know, there needs to be a way community sentiment or community input needs to be gauged for these various EIPs. It leaves it very broad, as it probably should, as things to allow things to evolve, for a sort of system to evolve. But that's the sort of thing that will allow Ethereum to really live on far past, you know, any of us individuals are alive. And so it's you know, the forking issue in particular, I do think that it's the argument that if you don't like what's happening now within the ecosystem, then you should just go off and fork and try to start your own thing. I don't particularly enjoy that argument, because just because I disagree with what's going on in, you know, my synagogue group, or just because I disagree with, you know, the student government that I was a part of at university, doesn't mean I want to leave and start my own thing. I just want to advocate for reform or changes within the current system. And I don't think the nuclear option and using the threat of that and always pointing to that being, if you don't like what's happening, as what you should do, I don't think that's a very fair argument to make all the time.
A good point. There's a difference between dissent and reform and actively, I forget the word I use, but there's a difference between dissenting for reform and actively going against something. And it's not binary, but right now we only have those binary options. It's interesting what you kind of been talking about. We've been doing, a group of us have been getting together and rereading the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers to see how like governance of the United States really started to sprout up. And the biggest difference between the two is that Anti-Federalists said governance should only happen when there's a vacuum that needs to be filled. Like let the vacuum appear and let the governance structure be pulled into it. And the Federalists said, no, we need to anticipate all of the problems and build structures in place that are resilient to anything that comes up. Which, like Hudson talked about earlier, we're starting to reach that point in time in Ethereum. Kind of on that note, to Yalda and then Hudson, should advancements in Ethereum level governance be done in a formalized process where we're very proactively thinking we need to put these structures into place to prevent potential issues? Or should we take the vacuum-based approach where we're not going to overburden people and take away their power, but rather we're going to let the vacuum be created and see what governance is pulled to it?
I mean, I guess that's more of a question of time and situation. I think that maybe it has advanced to a stage of governance right now where some processes should be more formalized, like, you know, publicizing a roadmap and having people like signal things as like DApp teams, that sort of thing. I think that we're reaching that stage where we could use like an additional level of insight beyond Twitter. So that's like one take on that. But yeah, I think that you can't like foresee every potential type of governance and design it all right away, but at least like let's learn from some of these more contentious decisions, whether it's ProgPow or like the advancement of EIP 1559, and just like make a few small tweaks to make the sentiment gathering a little better, for example, than Twitter. Let's move like post Twitter, like sentiment gathering. That would be great.
I'm sure Mattison totally agrees with that point. Hudson, kicking over to you, like as you guys talk about the core devs, do you think the core devs should proactively try to create a governance structure to be resilient? Or should, as a protocol, should we just allow the vacuum to be created, potentially run into issues, and then have to figure out what solution is the best one?
You know, the core devs are really busy, so I don't know if they want to create a governance structure. But I will say that they do really try to listen to both the community and people who are in positions like myself and James Hancock, who's the hard fork coordinator, to kind of take direction on how decisions should be made in the future and how like consensus should be reached. I don't think it has to be, because you kind of gave two options there of formalizing it versus power vacuum. And I kind of like, I almost see it as an in-between where it's like, there's not going to be a complete power vacuum where we come in and we're going to have to fix everything immediately. I think there's going to be just over time organic forming of certain elements of it. And the power vacuum is going to be in elements of the entire process rather than the entire process itself. If that makes any sense. Like, for instance, we might over time figure out a better way to come to rough consensus, but we might not have the piece of the puzzle of figuring out when hard forks would happen, just what should go into them or something like that. So it's going to be piecewise figuring stuff out.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot more like iterative approaches that we can take these days. And it's like not such a binary option. Vitalik, I kind of want to kick it over to you in a different light. First off, guys, we have about another 5 minutes of this formal process. If you have questions and answers, please put in the Q&A and we'll get to those at the top of the hour. So Vitalik, the question, I guess the way I would phrase it to you is, if those are the two different philosophies of thought, we do a lot of proactive thinking of governance structures that we should put in place that's going to be resilient, or we let the vacuum be created and we see what governance structure is pulled into it. You do a lot of thinking of full-on crypto economic design, right? You try to think of how the whole economy pulls together. That kind of feels a little bit more of this proactive thinking approach. Do you think that's the same approach we should be taking now? Like, should we be thinking proactively what governance structure we need, or let the power vacuum fill it?
I'm inclined to say that in the case of protocols, the reactive approach is better. Because the problem with these proactive approaches is that basically, like, if you do them wrong, then they just end up leading to fairly horrible results. And so it's better to kind of try them at small scales first. And the benefit of kind of starting from where we are today and going incrementally from there is basically that there is kind of a lot of kind of embedded local knowledge in the Ethereum ecosystem on kind of what approaches make sense, kind of what needs to be actually argued about, what doesn't, who should be involved in making decisions, and so forth, can be kind of maintained instead of needing to kind of explicitly write that out from scratch, because often, like, there is a lot of good insights people have that can't be explicitly written out. I guess, like, and there's a lot of kind of subtle examples of this, right? Like, one just example is the divide between what is allowed to be a just like technocratic decision between 5 people and what needs wide kind of community input, right? Like, there's clearly things that belong in both categories. And so, like, you know, various details of, you know, like snappy compression protocols clearly belong in the first category, whereas like issuance rates belong in the second, and there's a big gray area in the middle. And like, how would something kind of as complex as that even necessarily be formalized? Whereas, you know, if you take the current approach, you can start from a position that already has most of those things, and then you look at like where the problems are and fill them in over time.
Yeah, that's fair. That is fair. But in order to push back just a little bit, is that because we understand the protocol? Like, we think that the power vacuum could be filled? Like, if we're attracting new people to the space, do you think that argument to say, as new people come to the space, we need to show them how decisions are made?
And that's definitely a good argument, kind of in favor of the more formalized approach, that it's kind of easier to explain to newer people coming in, like, what's going on and where the decision making is happening. I guess that sort of thing the challenge, I guess, is that there's little value in making the governance style like extremely accessible if at the same time the technical knowledge needed to actually make useful decisions continues to not be accessible. And so, you know, like, would that even lead to a like reduction in quality of decision making and potentially? So it's the sort of thing where, and I think like in the long term, he clearly wants to move toward that. But like, how to get from here to there is definitely incrementally, and especially as you know, the Ethereum ecosystem is going to be in particular, is going to be undergoing this very rapid transition over the next couple of years as we add, you know, ETH2 and the merge and the Litecoin support and sharding and proof of stake and all of these things. But then, you know, after that point, it would turn into a more incremental thing.
It's an interesting and good point. And like, there's 2 different ways, again, to flatten the pyramid, right? Like, it doesn't have to be totally flat, and it doesn't have to be totally vertical. At some points, you just want to create the spatial relationships and make them closer to each other, make it look more like a mesh network, right? And I guess there's kind of different ways to accomplish that. I guess
right.
If we take that point to an extreme, though, should there even be a core devs then? Like, do you need the core devs to do it, or should we see what problems are not happening and seeing what devs step up to fix it? Or is that kind of what the core devs are? Maybe that's a question back to Hudson. Is the core devs
it is moving toward that, right?
Yeah, so it was the question, are we moving toward not needing the core devs?
The question is, are we moving towards not needing the core devs as formal? Like, is the process going to be more, we're not going to have core devs, we're going to see what problems arise, and we're going to see what devs step up into fill the void?
We're going to need core devs in the sense as we have them right now for at least the next 2 years, is my estimation, because that's when Vitalik actually had a really good AMA response the other day on Reddit where he talked about how there won't start to be ossification of the protocol for another 2 years. From that, I'm just kind of paraphrasing, but basically because of that, there's going to be a lot of change and it's going to be very rapid and iterative. And I think in order for that to happen, there needs to be people stepping up in positions of power like the core devs have today in this kind of technocratic sense and be making these decisions. Because if we have people stepping in that don't have the history or don't have that kind of background, it's going to be pretty chaotic, and I don't think it's going to work out very well. We've seen other like blockchain projects where they have their original devs and then they kind of get abandoned, or maybe the project forks, like how Bitcoin's forked 4 or 5 times, and we see the degrading quality of the project as you don't have that history behind the devs working on it.
It's an interesting point that, like, and something that I'll applaud Ethereum for, and like why I love being in this space, dog, is we're willing, like people are willing to make the hard decisions. You know, like a lot of these EIPs are not easy. They're not simple. There's not a clear right answer. But just because there's not a clear right answer doesn't mean we should be scared of what that decision entails. So stepping up, like one of the reasons we keep on advancing in a really interesting way. I want to give everyone a chance as we start to get to the Q&A to give a 1.5-minute answer on like what your biggest learning has been in terms of governance styles and governance philosophies. Like what learning have you had over your time and what you do that's like, oh, this learning makes governance that much better?
I can go first. So I think that the biggest takeaways I've come across from the past few years are 2 things. I actually wrote these down ahead of time because I was like, what if we talk about this? So 2 things, especially for Ethereum, is make sure we don't turn the entire ecosystem into an echo chamber and that we are able to take constructive criticism from everybody. And the second one, which is arguably more important, is to always welcome and promote newcomers and their ideas. Otherwise, we're going to have the problem that I just described about echo chamberness. So like having a welcoming community and really getting new ideas out there. And even if you're like, because people in Ethereum, they don't realize they're in positions of authority or fame or crypto Twitter famous or whatever. But like people are like, I talk to people and they're like, oh, I can't talk to this person like Martin Swinde or Peter or Vitalik because they're like core devs or they're the founder. But it's like, if you just, sometimes, just out of the blue, just do a Twitter comment, they might respond. And if you don't ask, then you won't know. So if you're a newcomer, feel free to really get involved. There's not enough involvement because people are nervous thinking this is like a traditional community when it really isn't.
Yeah, I mean, it speaks to a topic we didn't cover, which was the importance of community and governance, but maybe we'll get to that in the Q&A. Mattison? Biggest learning?
Sorry, I had to turn off my mic or turn on my mic there. The biggest learning that I've had is that, especially regarding, can't be extreme to one way or the other. So you can't have, a governance system that will perpetually be purely based on a small group of people. You can't have a governance system, in my opinion, that's effective, that's a pure, populist-driven democracy. Those are not the right systems. Creating something new that doesn't exist yet, that has never existed, a new governance structure that's not a republic, it's not a democratic republic, not a pure democracy, also not an oligopoly like exists in so many different other crypto projects, and not not a pure technocracy of a small amount of few. There's so much room for innovation within the crypto space, within governance in particular. And that's one of the key reasons why I joined the space, is because there's a playground of all sorts of things that can be thought about. Now, the stakes are very high, so it's not a joke, and it has to be iterated on, and has to be, step-by-step process. But there's just a lot of innovation is happening on the technical side. Just as much innovation can happen on the governance structure side.
Yeah, I totally agree about the innovation we're seeing. It's like mind-boggling how cool it is, in my opinion. Yalda, what's been your experience trying to lead governance at Meltdown? Biggest learning?
biggest learning is like just optimize, like having a process for optimizing your governance and your organization is very important. Otherwise things can go stagnant, or you kind of stick with the status quo and things don't evolve. I don't know if that's my biggest learning. That's the latest learning. Biggest learning in terms of just like governance in general, and just like maybe starting to return more toward just uh, cooperatives and admiring cooperative governance, and how maybe we can learn a lot about cooperatives and how those organizations have worked over the last 150 years, and instead of trying to reinvent all the governance stuff, like think of like, well, what is the governance structure that is community based, that does work in the real world. And I would say cooperatives. So I'm returning back to just my roots of how I got into DAOs, which were cooperatives. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I know I've talked with a lot of people about starting projects where we just take real life governance structures and we just build that on Ethereum. We like to reinvent the wheel. Like, we don't even know what a wheel is now. We're like reinventing everything. But every now and then it's like, what if we just took real life governance structures and built them on Ethereum and experimented? Kind of like that incremental approach. Vitalik, what do you think your biggest learning has been in creating better governance over the last 4 years, we'll call it?
So in the case of Ethereum governance specifically, one thing was just we did get, I think, a bit of evidence kind of against coin voting making a lot of sense. The big one is basically that like we had some kind of coin voting polls for like the DAO fork and the issuance reduction and the other issuance reduction and EIP 999. And in all of those cases, I agreed with the results, but at the same time, it was clear that like it was a couple of people driving the decision, and it wasn't really like a very effective process, and the participants didn't really align well with the people that actually kind of, I guess, should be the participants the most. And so it did, I think, make clear that like just leaning much more heavily on coin voting for protocol governance would just kind of cause quality to just tank completely. I think another thing that I learned more on the theory side is just going through kind of governance as an economics problem, and looking into kind of what would a theoretically optimal design be, and understanding how things like quadratic voting and funding work, for example. And one of the big corollaries of that line of work has been like basically recognizing the importance of this collusion issue. So basically, like if it's possible to kind of buy votes or sell votes, or kind of or in general unbundle voting rights from whatever thing that the voting rights are originally attached to, then that very easily leads to terrible consequences. And I mean, we've seen examples of this in EOS. We've seen examples of this in the Steam takeover and so forth. And so that does also really kind of put some pretty kind of tight constraints on like what kinds of properties formalized governance systems need to have if we want them to be kind of actually completely formalized, I guess.
That makes a lot of sense. And kind of your point about the token-based voting, there's this interesting book called Democracy for Realists that does an analysis of American politics over the last couple hundred years. And they talk about this idea of the folklore of democracy, which is the idea that if you give everybody the right to vote and you decentralize as much as possible, you're going to have a more democratic structure. And what they found is they looked at examples of the Democratic National Conventions where they tried decentralizing all the voting powers as possible. And they found that money actually had a bigger influence when you decentralize too much. That it was easier to take over the masses with like funding when you over decentralize something. And I'm not saying that's always true, no matter what, but it's an interesting counterpoint to this idea that like if you just disseminate power, it will be more democratic in nature.
Yeah, money is definitely in one of those that kind of really it's something that doesn't mix well with the economics of governance design, basically just because of how, if you're a small participant, there's a tragedy of the commons, and if you're a whale, there's not, and so the whales are going to drive the agenda. Again, honestly, just like because my own view on this is just because of how difficult it is to prevent people from moving money around. The most realistic thing to do is to just make sure that everyone gets enough money to be able to do the things that they need to do to participate in the system to at least some medium degree. So, I mean, in the case of national governments, that would mean like some kind of public financing. In the case of blockchain voting, and I kind of wonder what the equivalent would be, right? Because it feels like blockchain governance is still too nascent to really have an active kind of campaigning layer. But eventually,
are you announcing an airdrop so everyone's going to get 100 ETH in this chat today?
You have to first send 10 ETH, and then here's the QR code, and it'll talk to the hand.
No, I think that's interesting. I mean, I think it's easy for us to talk about political governance. I think you're right. The idea in like a lot of democracy world terms right now, this idea of democracy vouchers or democracy dollars, giving people money to specifically use for campaigning and politics, is one of the like most foremost thoughts right now. As like retroactive drops become more of a thing, like that becomes more of a realistic possibility. I think what's interesting and kind of what I want to end on as I move to the Q&As, something that I've heard all of you guys talk about, you all talk about, which I think is cool, is like we've all kind of admitted that there's different parts of governance we need to be doing. There's no one, we are not governance maximalists, if you will, right? We're not absolutists in any kind of governance style. And again, I'm really excited about this idea about composable governance. If one governance system isn't working, we can quickly switch it to another. I think DeFi Legos is just the beginning. DeGov Legos is really that's the dream right now. T-shirts coming soon. All right, let's think here. We're gonna take questions and answers for a bit, if that's cool. We're gonna start with Adam's question. Thoughts on how to grant equal representation to off-chain identities as opposed to token-weighted representation, especially in the near future without numerous on-chain ID data points. So I think what the question is trying to get at here, and clarify if you're wrong in the chat, Adam, is like you're just saying, token weighting voting isn't always the most fair. How do you equate unique ID to token weight voting? And until we have a DID approach, does token weighted voting become a good proxy? I'm going to start with Hudson.
I think the one that I think is, I really like, there's certain systems like Bright ID that are working right now to do this kind of reputation-based one identity per person style thing, where you get on a call and you hold up your QR code and you say, I'm really this person, and they scan it. And that goes back to kind of the early internet, where people would have their web of trust and they'd have their PGP keys that they would go to key sharing ceremonies for. And I really like that idea because it's really grassroots and it's very community focused. So that's why it appeals to me. And that's one of the ways I see that working, but I haven't looked at the problem that deeply. So web of trust is like my favorite one that I've heard about, just that general concept.
Someone else want to answer? Go ahead.
Yeah, I completely agree with Hudson. We actually integrated Bright ID on the Ether. I definitely think that having a ID system that identifies that this is a person that's tied to this account is great. And I also think that we're just starting to explore the ways that you can have tokenized reputation that's non-transferable, that you can't sell for money per se, that is tied to that identity. So a combination of the tokenized reputation that you earn plus that other portion of the identification system that recognizes that you are who you say you are and you're an individual person. those two things paired together could be very, very interesting to create an alternative system to one coin, one vote around.
Yalda or Vitalik, you want to offer an answer as well?
What was the exact question?
Yeah, thoughts on how to grant equal representation to off-chain identities as opposed to token-weighted representation, right? Until we have a decentralized identity system, is token-weighted voting a good proxy?
Right. Again, I think like one answer I have to the equal identity thing is that like it does, on the one hand, it does do a good job of kind of mitigating the kind of plutocracy problems, and so I do think that it's like some use of identities in some form is really valuable. But at the same time, I think one thing we haven't talked about is that there is this other important variable that governance needs to take into account, which is like degree of membership in a community. Right, like, you know, if the Ethereum ecosystem is deciding on whether or not to do the DAO fork, it should be Ethereum people deciding and not Bitcoin people, basically. And that's like, if you just have an identities system, then you're not going to get that. And so I think that like some mechanism that does manage to kind of determine your degree of membership in the community and to kind of give you a different level of power that's like maybe some sublinear function of your level of involvement, like, you know, a square root or something like that could be the best choice. So, I mean, one interesting thing actually is that if you look at quadratic funding, it manages to kind of give some of the benefits of that, because like if you don't care about the Ethereum ecosystem, then you're not going to be willing to spend $10 on manipulating the results, whereas you might be willing to, like, you know, go in and do a bunch of stupid votes just for fun. So just pushing up the cost of making some level of influence, and seems like it actually kind of has the effect, the expected effect. But I mean, like the quadratic funding has this kind of issue that I think nobody talks about yet, where basically there's nothing in the rules of quadratic funding that inherently privilege Ethereum projects over Bitcoin projects. And so the fact that there are Bitcoin, like theoretically, it's completely possible for a bunch of Bitcoin people to go and verify themselves and set up some project that's like actually really Bitcoin focused, and then that if there's more of them, then that's where kind of the matching funds would ends up moving towards. And so the only layer of defense we have toward that right now is basically just like centralized curation, and which is basically what's happening, right? And there even was centralized curation that like cut off some projects from participating in the earlier rounds. So like some stronger form of determining, you know, to what degree is the participant a member of the Ethereum community would create a kind of more neutral solution to that, but still active area of research.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting, and it brings up a higher level question. And I'm going to start with you, Yalda. This next one is like, what is the goal of governance? Like, what is our goal? Is it what's best for the ecosystem? Is it what's the most democratic? Is it what gives people the most power? And, you know, in the Q&A, it asks about, can you make arguments between a decentralized approach or a centralized one and the efficiency? But again, I think it all rolls up this idea of like, what is the goal of governance? I don't know, Yalda, if you have thoughts on that.
The goal of governance is to align the interests of stakeholders, common stakeholders in a system, essentially.
So our goal should be so it should not necessarily, our goal should never necessarily be to like advance the ecosystem forward as much as possible, but as leaders of governance systems in all of our respective domains, our goal should be to create systems that create the most alignment across as many people as possible, regardless of where that takes us.
Well, that's how you advance. The assumption is if you're aligning as the best as you could, that is what leads towards advancement. So it's like you're trying to make a good system, make everyone happy, right?
Mattison, do you agree?
People happy as you could.
As happy as you could. That's like the key. As you could, asterisk.
Yeah, as many people.
It's a good question. I view governance as more as the rules and processes that are put in place to propel an organization forward, leaving propel an organization forward incredibly broad for interpretation, as that organization will decide what that means in definition terms.
Hudson?
I like Yalda's answer a lot because I pretty much agree with it that, and the way that I would phrase it, I think, is if everyone aligns their interests together for the commonality of whatever they want to accomplish, it pushes things forward. So you're not necessarily having to focus on pushing things forward. It happens naturally. I think that's kind of what you were getting at, Yalda, right? Yeah. So yeah, it's just aligning incentives, coming together, and then from there, the other stuff happens organically.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Vitalik, what do you think the goal of governance is?
I mean, I think like different situations end up having kind of different governance needs, and there's always, I think, some kind of decision that needs to be made with a about what to do with a common resource. So sometimes that common resource is like some matching pool that needs to be used to fund grants. Sometimes that common resource is the protocol, and there need to be decisions made on top of made about where the protocol goes. And like the problem generally just involves how to kind of aggregate the interests of multiple participants.
You're muted, Aaron.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, there's this really famous quote that says, any government that doesn't have the blessing of the people is doomed to fail. And I think that actually is exactly what you guys are saying here with the governance. Governance being an alignment of agreement, right? If there's too much disalignment in your people, then people are going to be unhappy, and if they're unhappy, they're going to leave, or they're going to fork back to exit rights, which is really interesting. Cool. I want to go through one last question and then open up for networking at 6:30. I guess I'm looking through these questions. I think one that's pretty cool. Is there a question that any of you guys specifically wanted to answer? Let's see here. I do like this question, but someone might have to explain a little bit more. Why don't you copy the Athens democracy model? That was probably the best example of governance for humanity. Are people familiar with Athens governance style?
In which aspects of it? And Athens did a lot of things, right?
Sortition.
Sortition. No, in sortition.
Before you start, can you do a brief description of what sortition is?
Oh, just basically like you randomly select a small number of people, like like 300 or people, for example, or whatever number, and then you have them end up voting on decisions. I think sortition's interesting. We definitely. A lot of protocols use sortition already. So like the various Oracle protocols, like Augur and Kleros, they all rely on sortition of some form. So it's definitely an ingredient we need to kind of use more. No, and the reason the kind of Athens thing is confusing is that the other kind of famous in game theory circles thing that came out of, I think it was Athens, as this protocol for determining who the wealthiest citizens are so that you can tax them. And the protocol is basically that if you think someone else is wealthier, then you can challenge them, or if you think you're not the wealthiest, like basically you can challenge, and if and the challenge is that if they are not willing to trade all of their assets for all of your assets, then you know that they're wealthier than you are, and so they should be the ones that are responsible for paying for the Navy and not you, essentially. So it's like a very early version of a kind of proto-Harbinger tax, and I think that was really cool too.
interesting, and if you talk about this sortition that you were talking about, is those are all like judicial branches of governance, which is something that Ethereum hasn't even really gotten into yet, about like protocol level, like what does a judicial over Ethereum protocol look like? Which I think would be fascinating.
Individual kind of EIP committees, I get that's and like, it's not literal random sortition, but it is like one form of specialization that already exists.
Hudson?
Yeah, I was going to say, I found a question that I have a really hot take on that I want to answer, if that's okay. All right,
Give me
y'all
your
ready for
spicy
this?
take, Hudson. Give me that spicy take.
All right, here's the spicy take. Are there more/less cons than pros for layer one on-chain governance, and what are they? On-chain governance sucks hard. I don't like on-chain governance for layer one. Over time, I'm seeing more and more it turn into a plutocracy in places like Polkadot, and I don't see the appeal. I know I've read there. I think there's like a whole blog from Vitalik. Didn't you write a whole blog on how this like on-chain governance isn't good? Yeah. So just everyone go read that if you want like the summary of reasons why. But basically, it just turns into a plutocracy. And I'm kind of curious if Yalda or Mattison have ever thought about like what y'all think of that.
I agree. I don't think that on-chain governance makes sense. I think maybe you can have signaling, this sort of thing, but yeah, I like the current way.
Yeah, I 100% agree, Hudson. Every time I've seen on-chain governance, it's a plutocracy, and in my opinion, it's an ineffective plutocracy. They're not even governing effectively. Were the examples of the different chains that are using that system.
I really like this because it really is more honing on this idea that governance is composable. We should be able to plug and play our governance mechanisms to figure out like where we balance out. Like let's play with these Legos. If we and yeah, Vitalik, last thought on layer one governance, or should we just read the blog post?
Read the blog post. I don't think my views have changed since then. Vitalik.ca blog has been revamped to be slightly prettier recently, so go ahead and enjoy.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining. I want to thank Hudson, Yalda, Mattison. Thank you for joining. Vitalik, thank you for jumping on as our good guest feature. This was an awesome conversation. I loved every second of it. Big topics. Like, we are all working on Ethereum. We want to see it survive. How we govern it is going to become increasingly more important. So I think it's conversations like these that are ultimately going to propel the community forward in the way that we need it to be propelled. Without these conversations, we're kind of blind leading the blind. So thank you all. Thank you all again. Like, clap around to all four of you for getting us to where we are in ETH 2.0. It's a big step.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron, and thanks, Cameron, and everybody who organized this. This has been great. Aaron, especially, I thought you were a very engaging like moderator for this. I don't have a lot of good moderators, or I'm not, okay, I shouldn't say that. I don't want people to be like roasting previous moderators I've had, but basically, I feel like you did a really good job.
Absolutely.
Oh, Aaron does a fantastic job every month that we put this together. So it's part of the reason why we do it. So again, thank you everyone for coming out. It's been an absolutely fantastic conversation. Before we get into networking, I just want to quickly explain what the Blockchain Acceleration Foundation is. It stands for BAF. We're a 501c3 nonprofit that advances education in the blockchain space by acting as a trusted matchmaker among students, academics, and the industry. We get accredited courses started at schools. So we try to create the machine to pump out the talents. We started the first course at UCLA, first one at UC Santa Barbara, have one running at UC Davis right now. And yeah, it's completely free to become a member. We're actually governed by the blockchain club presidents, university club presidents at all the schools. And we aspire to be the first sort of tax exempt and compliant nonprofit, decentralized nonprofit. So there's a lot more to that, where, you know, we need money in order to like incentivize people to build. And so we are actively looking for donations. Since we're a tax exempt organization, if you're based in the US, you can write this off on your taxes. And there's a lot of tax benefits if you donate crypto. And our tagline's like donate crypto to accelerate crypto. So I'm gonna drop these links in the chat. You're also encouraged to become a back. We're ultimately a super highway of connections. I'm trying to identify what people want and what people are looking to give. If you're a student looking for a job, if you're an employer looking to hire, if you're a company looking for investment, and if you're an investor looking for investees, fill out the application and we will try to connect you to people that you're looking to connect with. So that being said, thank you. Thank you, Mattison, for actually, facilitating a lot of this and making this happen. And if you're sticking around for networking, which I highly recommend you do, turn on your mic and camera, and a little bit of best practice. Don't enter a new table and just interrupt the conversation. Wait for somebody to kind of ask you to introduce yourself, and just click around from table to table, and then meet each other. There's a lot of really cool people here, and I've made a lot of really great friends. We do this every single week, by the way. So if you become a member, you can stay in touch, and hope to see you guys around. Thanks again, everybody.
Organizing, Cameron.
What's up, Mattison?
Thank you for organizing.
Yeah, thank you,
Absolutely.
Cameron.
Thanks for organizing. My
My
transaction just cleared. I just sent you all some donation. So keep up the good work.
Oh, thank you, Hudson. Really appreciate that. That's amazing. Thank you. All right, guys. See you in networking.